The much-loved Wings Over Illawarra airshow has new owners and a new brand, but it has retained the high-calibre warbird lineup, which included the post-restoration debuts of several aeroplanes from HARS. Welcome to an all-new series of airshow dispatches, 7 shows in 5 countries coming up over the next few months. And we start, as usual, in Australia at the newly rebranded Airshows Downunder Shellharbour, formerly known as Wings Over Illawarra. It's Nigel Woolley behind the camera. Let's take a look at the lineup and running order. Featuring strongly the locally based Historical Aircraft Restoration Society, they open the programme. We particularly enjoy seeing the Fokker D.VII and P-2 Neptune, both returning to the airshow circuit after several years out. Then the Second World War fighters, after that the Australian debut of Paul Bennet's newly imported Fury, the classic jets Yak 110, and finally the Royal Australian Air Force displays round out the programme. So let's get straight to it with an aircraft that hasn't flown at an airshow for over 20 years. This is a replica of the Fokker D.VII flown by pioneering Australian aviator Sir Charles Kingsford Smith in the 1920s and 1930s. In his Fokker, named the Southern Cross, he became the first person to fly from Australia to New Zealand and the first person to cross the Pacific by air. This replica was built in the 1980s and, depending on exactly how you tally the numbers, she's either the largest or the second largest airworthy close replica aircraft in the world. Unfortunately, a landing accident in 2002 saw her grounded for over 2 decades, but the Historical Aircraft Restoration Society returned her to the air in December 2023. Also returning to airshow duties, this, the world's only airworthy example of the P-2 Neptune. This aircraft had just spent 2 years on the ground for refurbishment, but returned to flight in December 2023. The Neptune is a maritime patrol and anti-submarine platform with secondary roles as an airborne tracking and command post. It is powered by 2 Wright R3350 radial engines, and there are 2 J34 turbojets under the wings as well.
Operation Sabre Ferry, moving wrapped Sabre fighters from Williamstown to Butterworth Air Base in Malaya. We'll see a Sabre flying here later on, and it's flown by Jeff Trappett. And we also won the Castle Trophy, which is an international competition for...
The crowning glory of the HARS fleet is probably their C-121C Super Constellation. Until recently, this was the only airworthy Constellation in the world, but it was joined last summer by a second example, a C-121A owned by Lewis Air Legend in the United States. This particular aircraft is a military transport version used by the US Air Force, but today it's painted in a civilian-style paint scheme loosely based on that of Australian national airline Qantas. This recalls the fact that Qantas used the Super Constellation to pioneer long-haul passenger air travel. The most modern aircraft in the HARS fleet is this P-3 Orion, which was gifted to the Foundation by the Royal Australian Air Force in 2016. This particular aircraft has participated in many high-profile operations, including the search for MH370 and various deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan and Southeast Asia. The drawdown of Australian P-3 operations began in the late 2010s with the arrival of the P-8A Poseidon, and the last P-3s were retired in December 2023. Another maritime patrol asset, the S2G Tracker. This aircraft was designed to fulfill a very similar role to the P-3, except thanks to its smaller size, tail hook and superior power-to-weight ratio, it was capable of operating from aircraft carriers. This particular aircraft has served with both the US and Australian militaries and was later used by Qantas as a training aid for apprentice engineers. It was acquired by HARS in 2006. There are around 3 examples of the DHC-4 Caribou flying, and HARS operate 2 of them. The Caribou is a tactical airlifter with excellent STOL performance. The aircraft has a maximum takeoff weight of 13 tonnes and yet can operate from 200-metre strips. Australia purchased the Caribou to replace the Dakota in the 60s, and it remained in service until 2009. Two examples of the C-47 also flew past, although one of them has been converted into a civilian specification DC-3. While the large aeroplanes of the Historical Aircraft Restoration Society make this show famous, there are always plenty of lighter warbirds as well. Here, a Kitty Hawk from Arthur Pipe and Steel and a Warhawk from Pays Air Service, both based at Scone. We also enjoyed a two-ship of Mustangs, one Australian-built CA-18 and one P-51D. The P-51, flying at the back of this formation, is known as Dove of Peace, and this was its Shellharbour debut. Now time for the only FW-190 in the Southern Hemisphere, doing battle with a Spitfire Mark 8. The FW-190 is based on the remains of an original Second World War aircraft built in 1944, although she was later rebuilt by Flugwork in the USA between 2001 and 2011, mainly using modern components. The engine, for example, is a Russian Ash 82 rather than the original BMW 801. The Spitfire comes from 100 Squadron RAAF, which is the Australian Air Force's heritage unit. We'll see several more of their aircraft over the next few minutes. Here, for example, is 100 Squadron's Hudson, the only Mark III Hudson currently flying in the world. The Hudson's many roles included troop transport, VIP transport, meteorological reconnaissance, maritime patrol, and air-sea rescue. Six of the Second World War aircraft, 5 we've already seen, plus Paul Bennett's Avenger, joined up for a formation pass. Here's more from the TBM Avenger, which was one of several acts contributed by the Paul Bennett Airshows collection. This is one of the few aircraft types at the show that hasn't been used in some capacity by the Australian military, but it has been operated by 11 other nations, including the USA, UK, France and New Zealand. The highest profile warbird visitor at the show was probably Sea Fury FB-11's Sawbones. This aircraft, a former Reno Air Racer, was sold to Australia in 2023. It's now part of the Paul Bennet Airshows collection, and this is its first Australian airshow appearance. It's also the first time in over a decade that Australia has been home to an airworthy Fury. It started out in life as a Fury ISS, but was modified into a Sea Fury after entering civilian ownership in the United States. Other modifications included swapping out its complex and comparatively unreliable Bristol Centaurus for a Wright R3350. Sawbones participated in no fewer than 18 editions of the National Championship air races in Reno, but its racing career came to an abrupt end in 2019 when the canopy detached mid-race. The aircraft was put up for sale shortly afterwards. Paul Bennet doesn't just own a fleet of warbirds, he also leads the Sky Aces, probably the most prolific and best-known civilian aerobatic team in Australia. They display a mixed fleet of highly modified Pitts biplanes, and they not only perform at most of Australia's major airshows, but they've frequently visited Asia as well. There were two classic jets in the flying display at Shellharbour, both provided by 100 Squadron RAAF. The A-37B Dragonfly and Canberra TT-18 both performed solo displays, and a third jet, Jeff Trappett's CA-27 Sabre, was also in attendance, but was prevented from flying due to weather and technical problems. Unusually for an aircraft operated by 100 Squadron, the A-37 was never actually flown by the Australian military, but Australia does still have an association with this jet. South Vietnamese A-37s were used extensively during the Vietnam War, often in support of Australian ground troops and under the direction of Australian forward air controllers. The other classic jet in the programme was the Canberra. This particular example was built as a Canberra T4 trainer for the Royal Air Force and was later modified into a TT-18 target tug. It's been flying on the Civil Register since 1992 and has been a prolific airshow performer in both its native UK and Australia. One of the most impressive performances of the weekend came from this extraordinary one-of-a-kind Yak 110. The Yak 110 was designed by Jeff Bourbon and Del Collar in the USA. It comprises two Yak 55 fuselages with a J85 jet turbine fitted between them, giving the aircraft a thrust-to-weight ratio of greater than 1:1 and making it the only triple-engine aircraft in the world to be capable of unlimited category aerobatics. The Yak 110 burst onto the American airshow scene in 2018 and was one of the star performers at AirVenture that summer. It has since been purchased by Code 4, the company that runs the Pacific Airshow, and it was shipped to Australia in 2023 to take part in the Pacific Airshow's inaugural Gold Coast edition. It seems the plan is for the Yak 110 to remain in Australia for at least the next few years. The Royal Australian Air Force always supports the airshow in Shellharbour. This year was no exception. The RAAF's transport fleet is unusually varied for a mid-sized modern air force. 12 of these C-130J Hercules operate alongside 8 C-17s, 10 C-27s and 6 KC-30s. Last year it was announced that Australia would purchase 20 additional C-130Js, replacing and expanding upon the current 12, with the first aircraft expected to arrive in 2027. Frontline air power was represented by the F-35A Lightning II, which is the most numerous combat aircraft in Australian service. This aircraft comes from No. 2 OCU, the F-35 Type-Specific Training Unit, and it's flown by Squadron Leader Ross Bauman. this was his final airshow as Australia's F-35 display pilot. The first F-35s were delivered to the RAAF in 2014, and they were of the TR2 Block 3 standard. Initial operating capability was reached in 2020. Final operating capability has now been delayed until the second half of 2024. This will allow the last few deliveries to be fitted out to the all-new TR3 Block 3 standard, which includes new processing and memory units. This not only adds to the aircraft's present-day capabilities, but will also make it easier to upgrade them to the upcoming Block 4 standard in future years. This year, the RAAF is not just performing F-35 solo displays, but is also dabbling with US Air Force-style heritage flights. In Shellharbour, the F-35 was joined by a CA-18 Mustang Mark 23. This is the final act of our programme from Airshows Downunder Shellharbour, whose new owners have successfully proved that they understand what makes this airshow so popular, and we look forward to returning for the next edition in 2026. Next time, we're at Air VG, where every single aircraft type in the Croatian Air Force is expected to perform, including, for the final time, one of their MiG-21s. Until then, from me, Adam Landau, it's goodbye for now.